Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the Spring 2024 Workshop Final Briefings. Many master's programs culminate in presentations of a master's thesis that an individual does on their own. This is a program that culminates in a group project done as a public service for a client. And it relates to the fact that we believe that interdisciplinary work requires groups to work together as a team, which this class has done, and to do this as a public service for a client to move forward our goal of making the world a little bit more sustainable. And so today is the culmination of really 3 semesters of very hard work that all of you have been engaged in collectively. And the other thing I guess I'd say is that you've moved through these things together with great spirit and a great sense of cooperativeness that the faculty appreciate, I appreciate, and I think you're more productive because of it. The other thing I guess I would remind you of is that this session is very special because it's the last time you'll all be together as a cohort in this way, together as a class working on something that you've been engaged in through the whole year. So at the day after Memorial Day in 2023, you all gathered. We told you that this was going to be a year of intense work and study, and at the end of that year, you would know things that you didn't know when you started. I believe that's where we are today, and the evidence of that is going to be the briefings that we're going to hear. So I'll have some concluding thoughts at the end of all this, but why don't we begin with our first briefing on resilient Ridgewood.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Menita, and today I have the honor of being able to present the final briefing on behalf of my team, Resilient Ridgewood. In this presentation, I will go through the background of the problem and what we were trying to solve, how we address this problem and our approach, as well as our final recommendations for the town. Now imagine you move out of the city to a quiet small town. You're looking for a bigger house, good schools, and you're ready to raise your children and start a nice, quiet chapter in your life. And then one day, your house floods. It's a tragedy, you tell yourself, but these things happen. But then it floods again, and again, and again, and that quiet life you'd built for yourself turns into a mountain of debt that insurance won't cover, a constant anticipatory anxiety over when the next flood will hit, and a sense of feeling stuck because your home can't sell for what it was worth anymore and you can't afford to move out. This is the reality that the residents of Ridgewood, New Jersey are slowly seeing play out. A small town of about 26,000 residents, Ridgewood has seen an increase in the frequency and intensity of flooding events in recent years. Floods that would happen once every 3 years now happen every 3 months. And about a fifth of all the homes in Ridgewood are at constant risk of flood damage. Small towns like Ridgewood face a lot of the same adaptive challenges to climate change that cities do because they're highly built up, have few impermeable surfaces. Ridgewood also has quite a steep terrain. But while they face the same issues, towns like Ridgewood don't have access to the same scale of financial resources as cities do to help them adapt. While the per capita income in Ridgewood is significantly higher than the national average, the town's tax base is still small. And so the local government doesn't have the financial capacity to deal with the scale of the issue. For small towns like Ridgewood, climate change isn't just an adaptive challenge, a challenge to the status quo, it's an existential threat. And like cities, small towns like Ridgewood also need high inputs of energy and resources to sustain themselves. Ridgewood's energy consumption patterns are currently unsustainable. And as you can see in the graph on the left, most of this comes from the residents' lifestyles. So residential electricity and gasoline consumption make up the greatest chunk of Ridgewood's energy use. So Ridgewood's challenge with climate change is twofold. They need to adapt to the increase in flood events and other natural disasters, and they need to mitigate climate change by reducing their carbon footprint. And one step that Ridgewood has taken to meet this challenge is to form an internal advisory team called Green Ridgewood. And it is Green Ridgewood who reached out to us to help them brainstorm how to deal with this twofold challenge. So what we've been asked to deliver is essentially a strategic roadmap that addresses both mitigation and adaptation, and that would allow the town to become climate resilient in the long term. Now, how did we go about putting together this roadmap? We started by breaking down the problem into 3 discrete areas of focus: flooding, decarbonization, and how to fund these 2 issues. And then through a combination of comparative case study analyses, expert and local interviews, modeling flood risk, analyzing the town's emissions profile, and reading many, many journal articles, we put together a list of potential options for what the town could do to address both the flooding and decarbonization issues. For flood prevention, our main aim was, as far as possible, to prevent the town's river from overflowing and to mitigate the land-based impacts of any overflow in case it does happen. Additionally, we also wanted to look into the damage caused by precipitation, and we wanted to explore a combination of green and gray infrastructure solutions, so more natural versus more man-made solutions. And some of the solutions that we did look at included rain barrels, permeability measures, barrages, and weirs, which are both sort of like dams, and so on. For decarbonization, the greatest contributions to Ridgewood's emissions that we discussed before came from residential electricity use as well as gasoline consumption. And so our solutions were sort of directed towards addressing these 2 problems. And some viable strategies that we looked at included green power purchase agreements, carpooling initiatives, community microgrids, and so on. Once we had these potential options mapped out for each category, we did a series of feasibility evaluations, and this included doing cost-benefit analyses, looking at the political and social factors associated with each of these. So would cross-town collaboration or community engagement be required, and how possible might it be to achieve that? We also tried to estimate the extent of the impact in terms of flood mitigation or emissions reductions that we can expect from these initiatives, as well as how long we could sustain that impact. Synthesizing all of our research, we mapped out these options by impact versus effort into sort of impact-effort matrix. And what we wanted to do from this was to identify some of the most high-impact solutions, so those that are at sort of the top corner of this graph, as well as to offer some low-hanging fruit. That is, initiatives that may or may not have a high impact, but that would be very low effort, so very easy to implement. And as you can see in the matrix, some of the most high impact solutions are power purchase agreements, redirection of the brook, electric vehicles, while solutions like rain barrels are attractive because they're low effort. And based on these results, our primary recommendations for the town included: for flood mitigation, we suggested installing private rain barrels as a short-term solution because it's less capital intensive and it's a great way to get community engagement on the issue. We also recommended installing an underground detention basin in the most flood-prone part of town, as it would mitigate some of the land-based impacts of flood damage. And over the longer term, we suggested that the town look into redirecting the river. For decarbonization, we recommended negotiating a green power purchase agreement in the short term, and then focusing on fleet electrification and setting up a community microgrid in the long run. Our primary motivations behind these was, of course, to address the 2 key sources of emissions, as well as to find a way for Ridgewood to gain a level of energy democracy in the long run and not be reliant on the PSENG or their electricity provider's energy grid. Now, these are time-sensitive issues. And we wanted to emphasize that it isn't just important to execute these initiatives, but to do them in a way that's as quickly as feasible. Our sustainability roadmap, therefore, includes a timeline for the planning and execution of these initiatives over a 5-year period. And we've broken them down, as you can see, into short-term, medium-term, and long-term initiatives that we estimate will take, from between less than 2 years to about 2 to 5 years, or initiatives that would take 5 years or more. Now, While we tried our best to find solutions that address the core aspects of both problems, our analysis is limited by a lack of available data points for both factors. Ridgewood doesn't have any concrete data relating to stream flow or the height of the water table, so our analysis for flooding was based on a variety of estimates. Similarly, for the emissions analysis, the data that was used to assess Ridgewood's emissions came from a state-level repository that was last updated in 2020. So it's possible that the data that that we did work with does not reflect the current trends. The data that does exist is also scattered across municipal offices within Ridgewood, and there's a great need to consolidate all of this into a single repository. Now, while we use models and worked with experts to overcome this gap, there's a need for Ridgewood to be able to set up systems themselves to collect this data so that they can benchmark their current situation and evaluate the success of their initiatives and don't need to do the extent of the research that we had to do. So our recommendations include a framework for data gathering and consolidation to be able to measure success. And for flooding, this includes encouraging Ridgewood to invest in flood risk models to assess the extent of the flood damage, as well as look into other data like house prices and insurance premiums that would respond to flood risk. For decarbonization, we want Ridgewood to track its vehicular emissions as well as emissions from electricity and gas consumption, and it could potentially do this through partnerships with their electricity provider, PSE&G, as well as with the New Jersey Transport Authority. Now, as a next step, Ridgewood needs to set up clear formal systems for data analysis and consolidation, and it also needs an authority that can help guide this process. Green Ridgewood is currently an advisory body, and it doesn't have any formal status within the City Council. So we've also suggested that Green Ridgewood be formalized into a coordinating capacity with the agency to make decisions and to execute these decisions. It would also help to communicate our proposed initiatives with the town to make the town aware of and included in the dialogue of its mitigation and adaptation efforts. And now it's also important for Ridgewood to set up systems to fund some of these initiatives. And by looking at case studies from similar projects in other towns, we suggested that the Ridgewood Town Council set aside about 10% of their capital budget every year to fund the projects that we recommend, and that they also look into getting assistance from FEMA or state grants. Now, the biggest roadblock that everyone encounters with climate change is the perceived insurmountability of it. What we want to give Ridgewood with this roadmap is a sense of feeling somewhat in control and less vulnerable. Instead of feeling anxious during every flood, we want the residents to feel prepared to handle it. We want them to feel empowered. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. Before we end, I'd like to thank my task team, as well as our managers, Greg and Connor, and our advisor, Professor Callahan, for helping us put this together and guiding us through the process. Thank you.
We take questions.
Sorry. So sorry.
Do we have a microphone for questions?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
May I say thank you on behalf of Ridgewood?
Yeah.
This is wonderful advice.
Wonderful presentation, Meeta. I was just wondering, so your long-term solution of redirecting the river seems quite ambitious, and then also could potentially have some environmental consequences. What more research did y'all do into that particular solution?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so I think one reason why we suggested redirecting the river was also because, it's the potential positive impact in terms of mitigating flood damage was significantly higher than some of the other initiatives we looked into. But one potential positive of river redirection in this case would be that it might actually have a positive ecological impact, because it might help reconnect previously disconnected floodplains. And so, of course, there is a negative ecological context that we must look into. But in this case, there was a potential for there being a positive ecological outcome.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.